Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of E.W. Jackson for America. Well, I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Of course, we now have a new national holiday, Juneteenth. As I've said many times before, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, Juneteenth is a Texas celebration. It is really very bad history. I mean, it really teaches bad history because the idea that the slaves were liberated on June 19th is preposterous. Slavery ended really, you could call it three separate stages. The issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, which only freed the slaves that the Union troops had control over, because the Confederate states could care less what Abraham Lincoln said. Okay, so as a practical matter, any state that wasn't under the control of Union troops, which was most of the Confederate states at that point, there was no freedom for slaves. But it was a symbolic gesture. That, by the way, it didn't apply to Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, or Delaware, because those were slave states that remained in the Union, and therefore the Emancipation Proclamation excluded those states. Now, most people are not even aware of that, but it was a political proclamation that was intended to undermine the stability of the slave states. And you had 4 slave states that had not seceded but stayed with the Union that the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to. Plus, it didn't apply to parts of Virginia, Tennessee, or Louisiana. Parts of those were excluded as well. I think for Virginia, it was the part that ultimately became West Virginia. But, so it's just bad history. But nevertheless, that was a symbolic gesture. And then the second stage would be, of course, the end of the Civil War, when at that point the Union's in control. Slavery is at an end as soon as that can be enforced in all the states of the Union. Well, Texas was the furthest from the capital, and I don't believe that anybody, slaves in Texas, didn't know that slavery was over. I think they knew, but what choice did they have? I mean, you still had Confederates in control in Texas, so you were still put in a position of trying to run away, which might put your life at risk. So General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas on June 19, 1865, and he issues a declaration that the slaves in Texas are free. Now, they still weren't free in Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, or Delaware. You know where they became free there? December 18, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified, which declared involuntary servitude to be unconstitutional. So, but look, here's my attitude about it. If people want to, they celebrate it, fine. I've spoken at Juneteenth events before it became a national holiday. It's not a national holiday. I think that was done to pander and make people feel good. But folks, I'm spending more time on this than I really plan to. Here's the bottom line. You still have 72 to 82% of children in the black community born out of wedlock. You still have 7,500 in a good year to 10,000 in a bad year, black people murdered in the inner cities of our country in black-on-black crime. You still have 87% of black children who graduate from high school are functionally illiterate, reading at an 8th grade level or lower. You still have massive economic dislocation, poverty in the inner cities of our country. And all of these problems are not solved by Juneteenth. I mean, I have lost patience, frankly. That's why I say if people want to celebrate it, fine. I mean, I'm not going to make a big stink over it. But I am exhausted with manipulating the manipulating the black community with symbols over substance. In other words, don't look at the fact that your children are being educated. Oh, look over here, we got Juneteenth. Oh, wow, yay, victory. Yeah, don't look over here. The 300 and, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but close to 350 children have been murdered since 2020, and the defund the police movement and dismantle the police movement started. 320 innocent children murdered in their beds, in their backyards, in their living rooms, in their parents' cars, doing nothing wrong, riding their bikes in their neighborhoods, murdered. Well, but don't look over at that. No. Look over. We got Juneteenth. Wow. It's just, tearing down statues and protesting, massive riots and looting over the deaths of people like George Floyd, who certainly should not have died. He should not have been murdered. And Darren Gavin is exactly where he belongs. I think that's the guy's name. That cop is exactly where he belongs. They've even apparently convicted some of the police officers who stood by and watched. I'm a little less clear about that one. They are certainly morally culpable. Whether they're legally culpable, to me, is another matter. But since that happened, okay, you've had George Floyd lionized. I mean, George Floyd was a meth addict and a fentanyl addict and a counterfeiter, or at least he was passing counterfeit money. He's no icon. He's nobody to be looked up to. He's nobody to be admired. It's not like he's some martyr for the cause who went out and sacrificed himself. He was a criminal, and he came across a corrupt cop. And things went terribly wrong, and they shouldn't have. There's no question about that. But that doesn't make George Floyd a hero. But at any rate, folks, so we got to get to solving these issues, not accepting cheap buy-offs with symbolism. And that's all that is. That's all that is. I mean, to me, that's all Juneteenth is. It's a cheap buy-off with symbolism. So at any rate, but that's not the main thing I wanted to talk about, but I'm glad I got it out there. I guess it was bubbling up in me, and I was planning to not even try to just gloss over it and move on. But at any rate, and by the way, I think Juneteenth in Texas, where it was really significant, I mean, that makes perfect sense. It's great. It's a big deal apparently in Texas. But for the rest of the country, here again, my thought was, if you're really going to celebrate a national holiday to celebrate the end of slavery, that would be December 18th, 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified. Because that's when, as a national matter, slavery actually ended. And by the way, I believe it was Delaware and Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken, that still had slavery until the 13th Amendment was passed. So that's what? That's 9 months after the Civil War had ended. But once the 13th Amendment has passed, it's over. Slavery as a legal institution is done. It is unconstitutional at that point. Here's what I really want to get to. And by the way, just before I do, folks, let me remind you, on July 14th, I don't know whether you can read that. I hope you can. On July 14th, 7/14, we're having a 2nd Chronicles 7/14 patriotic rally to secure America's future. It's going to be at the Richmond Marriott, 500 East Broad in Richmond, Virginia. And it's a national rally, folks, so come from wherever you are. If you can make it, come. You don't want to miss this. This is going to be important. So the reception starts at 6. The program starts at 7. And we got big things to talk about for the future of our country. So I hope you'll be there for it. That's one. And don't forget my book, Sweet Land of Liberty. Thank you all very much. It's doing very, very well. Just sent out a bunch of signed patriotic partner books So if you sign up as a patriotic partner with $25 or more a month, I will send you a free signed numbered copy of my book. I think about 80 people have gotten these so far, and I'm happy to send out as many as you like. And by the way, I want to mention again, we have started to get orders now for people who want to use these in home groups, Sunday school class, Christian schools, and so forth. Basically use it as a textbook to teach about American history and to teach an attitude about American patriotism, because I love my country, but here I make clear why I love my country and why I believe it's the appropriate attitude to have toward America for every citizen, regardless of your background. For somebody who is the descendant of slaves, if I love this country, when you got a lot of forces out there telling me I should be bitter and angry and hateful and I'm a victim and all of that, bunk. If I love this country, every single American ought to love this country, because most Americans aren't facing the resistance, although that's increasing, that people of African background face, because we're told because of slavery we should kind of hate America. Every American citizen has hit the proverbial lottery. When you were born an American, you were born privileged. I don't care what your economic circumstances were. You were born privileged because of the vast opportunity that surrounds you that's unparalleled in the entire world. So you can go to standamerica.us to get my book, standamerica.us to get my book. You can, of course, buy it wherever books are sold if you just want to buy it. If you want to get a 15% discount, go to my publisher. If you want to buy books en masse, go to my publisher. The website there is faithfultext.com, faithfultext.com. One other thing. We are in the process of buying 142 acres of land, 142.33 acres of land to be precise about it, for our Promised Land campus that will hold our church, our school, the stand offices, the warehouse, and workspace for all of my books and tapes and CDs and DVDs and articles and everything else that we want to be able to send out to people, all right there. We want to one day create a boarding school there where kids can come and actually live on campus, and also a Bible college. It's going to take a while to pull all that together, but first we got to get the land secured. I'm asking for your help. You can make a contribution to this building fund, the Promised Land campus, at standamerica.us. By the way, if you sign up for a Patriot Partner, that's a help. That's a help, because it's a partnership between Stand and the church, Stand and the Called Church. Or you can go to thecalled.org and you can make a contribution to the church, thecalled.org, toward this Promised Land campus and our building fund efforts. And pray for us, please, because we've got a number of hurdles to get over. This is zoned farmland. We've got to get a conditional use permit to be able to use it, to put the buildings on it that we want to have. So it's quite a lengthy process to have to go through to get all of that done. So please be praying for us. We're taking it step by step as we go. We haven't yet secured the land, but we do have it under contract, okay? And right now what we're trying to do is make sure that we secure it so that we can then go on to do the things with that land that we really believe God has called us to do. Here's what I want to talk to you about, and please pay close attention to this, because it's probably not where you expect me to go. You know, President James Monroe created something he called the Monroe Doctrine. And what the Monroe Doctrine said, in effect, it was applied primarily to European powers, because those were the only powers that were exploring the world at the time. And he said, basically, European powers were no longer welcome to colonize and do anything else in the Western Hemisphere. In other words, they were kicked out of North America, and for all practical purposes, kicked out of South America as well. Now we know Spain had a tremendous impact in South America. That's why South Americans speak Spanish. They don't speak Spanish because they're native Spaniards. They speak Spanish because Spain colonized South America. And so, you know, I always say, when people say, well, you know, Hispanic is a person of color, I say, well, once again, I'm just amazed at the lack, the level of ignorance that people have. Hispanics are from all races. You have black Hispanics. You have European, and I'm talking about ancestrally. You have people of a European ancestry, Spain, who are Hispanics. I believe it's Brazil that is like 85% European. So Hispanic is not a race. It is a language, and all the people who speak Spanish are not people of Africa or Aboriginals or Indians, Native Indians, Native Americans from South America. So it is not a race. But the Monroe Doctrine effectively kicked Spain and everybody else out of North America, and basically, ultimately, kicked everybody out of the Western Hemisphere. That's why when Russia tried to move into Cuba and put missile sites in Cuba, Khrushchev came right up against the Monroe Doctrine. Well, we're going to need to once again reestablish, maybe we'll call it the Jackson Doctrine in this case, because I've got something in mind broader than what Monroe had, because President Monroe had, because what he had in mind was European exploration. What I'm thinking about right now is China. Because as you know, China now has a spy base in Cuba. That is without dispute. China has a spy base in Cuba. And our Secretary of State, Blinken, is over there right now. Maybe he's on his way back now. But over there kowtowing and bowing to Xi Jinping and asking for help, while Xi Jinping is saying America's choice is either cooperation or conflict. Yeah. The big panda bully is basically pointing his finger at the little American, telling him, you better get your act together or there's going to be a price to pay. Now, we face an existential threat to our future from within and without. And the threat from within is Marxism, and the threat from without is Marxism. Because China is the threat from without, and China is a Marxist country. It is a communist country. And the threat from within is Marxism. See, I'm convinced, folks, that one of the reasons why there seems to be so much willingness to allow communist China to spread Marxism using money, the two M's of Chinese diplomacy. They've got a third, and it's, believe me, it's being built up, which is the military. But money, Marxism, the military are the three M's of Chinese diplomacy. And they're spreading Marxism using money. You know, their Belt and Road Initiative in Africa right now, for example, I'm reading a book on the mining of cobalt and lithium in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is not democratic at all, but nevertheless, that's what they call it. And it is horrendous. The amount of abuse, of slavery, of intimidation, of child abuse and child slavery it's astounding. We got people in this country using cell phones every day, buying electric cars, thinking they're doing something great, and much of those materials, those products, are the result of horrifying child and adult slave labor in the Congo. And guess who's in control of all that? Communist China. The Chinese Communist Party is in control of all of that, because they're using their money, and with their money they're spreading Marxism. And according to this author, Siddharth, these mines are like they're like little police states with armed guards all around them to keep prying eyes away from seeing the level of abuse that is taking place in this mining process, so that you and I can have a cell phone, or so that these elites can go out and buy their electric cars and pat themselves on the back and tell each other they're saving the planet. Now, China has now got its tentacles deep in Africa, and of course they're spreading them all over the world, including in our country. I mean, we've heard about the buying of farmland. We've heard about buying of strategic land near our military bases. We've heard about the balloons flying over our nuclear and sensitive military facilities, gathering intelligence and information. We've heard about their pseudo police departments spread around our country, where they're keeping an eye on Chinese nationals, as well as people who are American citizens who happen to be Chinese, who they're also trying to intimidate and trying to control. We know about COVID coming from the Wuhan laboratory. That's indisputable now. And the left dismissed that as conspiracy thinking. And look, and on it goes. We know about the level of control they have over the NBA, for example, because of all the money being made in China. And they basically turn people like LeBron James into their step-and fetchits. They're sycophants, willing to denounce America, even though America has made them millionaires and billionaires, while justifying China, even though China is a brutal, dictatorial, totalitarian regime that regularly arrests and tortures and imprisons and murders people without any due process of law. You get out of line, you disappear. A country that will tell women, here's how many babies you can have, and if you try to have more, we will forcibly abort you. And here we are in a country debating abortion because each state has the right to make its own laws right now. And we're debating the issue, seeing whose views are going to predominate. In China, there's no debate. They will tell you. And then if you don't adhere, they will force you. And yet these same people who want to denounce America as racist and sexist and this, that, and the other will stand up and justify China. As far as I'm concerned, they're traitors to our country. And yes, I put LeBron James right at the top of that list with his simple self. Now, I know that's harsh, folks, but it needs to be said because this is serious stuff. Look, I've said this before. We could end up at war with China. A kinetic war, a hot war. And it would be horrifying. I don't want that. I know you don't want that because nobody in their right mind wants that. But the best way to avoid that is to demonstrate and project and to actually have such strength that an enemy is going to pause 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 50 times before messing with us. And right now what we're projecting is weakness. Now, believe it or not, all of that was laying the groundwork, but let me come to what my ultimate point is here for this morning. Because nobody wants to say this, but it needs to be said. You could call China our economic adversary. The Biden administration says, no, they're just our competitor. I mean, if they believe that, they're more dangerous to this country. If the Biden administration actually believes that, they're more dangerous to this country than even I thought. I hope that they're just saying that because they think it's diplomatically necessary. I hope they don't actually believe that we are simply competitors with China. I hope they know that China is at very least an adversary. So economically, politically, militarily, an adversary, but spiritually an enemy. An enemy. The Communist Chinese Party is our spiritual enemy. That thing is the spiritual enemy of the American people. I didn't say the Chinese people are our enemies. I don't want the Chinese people to be our enemies. I don't think of them as our enemies. I don't want them to think of us as our enemies. I see them as victims of this communist regime and people who desperately really need to be liberated, need to be free. Here's why we are spiritual enemies, because the very premise of a communist regime is that there is no God. Just think about that for a second. Because the people who in our country who seem so simpatico, like apparently our Secretary of State, who's going, we don't want to decouple from China. It's not a matter of decoupling. I mean, they make up this language, then they knock it down as if they've done some great thing. The question is, we don't want to be dependent upon China. We don't want to have to turn to China for the vital needs of our country, our pharmaceuticals, our military equipment, our rail cars, our food. We don't want to be dependent upon China. I don't have a problem with appropriate trade with China, but we've got a major, a major trade deficit with China. Biden sneered at the idea that China would eat our lunch. Well, they're eating our lunch because we've got weak leaders who are allowing them to outmaneuver us on the international chessboard. So I would expand it and say, well, the Jackson Doctrine would not simply be get that spy base out of Cuba because you're not welcome in the Western Hemisphere, or we're going to have a major problem. And I mean it. It's got to go. I mean, well, maybe we ought to put a spy base in Taiwan to spy on communist China. How would they like that? But beyond that, folks, beyond that, this would be the Jackson Doctrine. We will compete with communist China on every level, everywhere. And let me say that again, because to me, this is what it's going to take to avoid war. Because otherwise, we're going to look up one day and see China so predominant around the world, so influential, so much in control, that we'll find ourselves isolated off into another corner with even our allies depending upon China. So we don't have the money to do that. I really believe that if we unleash the powers and productivity, the power and productivity of the American people, our economy can begin to grow 4, 5, 6% of economic growth annually and would hum right along. Get government out of the way, get taxes lowered, get these regulations eliminated that are standing in the way, rein in the Environmental Protection Agency. I've got an idea about that, by the way, which I won't get into right now. But get rid of all of this stuff that is just clamping down on the economy, and just release it, and the American people will do the rest. We always have. Particularly if we begin to restore the notion of the work ethic and the notion of American innovation and ideas and invention and productivity. We will compete with China on every level, everywhere. We've got to show the world that America is the big man on campus, or big guy on the block, or however you want to put it, but that America is still predominant. We can't shrink back. And I'm not talking about being the policeman of the world. That's not what I'm not getting into. Sending troops everywhere, every time. No, I'm not talking about that. I mean, right now, for example, we've allowed China to move in and buy up all of these cobalt and lithium mines and the electric cars that these apocalyptic environmental crazies tell us we have to have. Guess what? We got to get them not only by the slave labor, killing African children whose lungs are filled with cobalt and all kinds of radioactive material and who are dying, working 12 to 14 hours a day, scraping that cobalt, digging that cobalt out of the ground in the Congo. And then all of that's going to communist China, which we then have to turn around and buy from them in order to make our cars. Which is a whole other issue about this whole environmental nutcase stuff. The world's going to end. This is what it's gotten us to. Enslavement of more slavery in Africa and more dependence upon communist China. We allowed that to happen. We sat by and allowed it to happen. We could have been the predominant players there with humane treatment of those people and using those resources ourselves. We've got to bring manufacturing back. As far as I'm concerned, it's a national security emergency. We got to bring manufacturing back to our country. Everything you buy now, made in China, made in China, made in China. I mean, to hear that our pharmaceuticals come from China? Even some of our weapons parts being made in China. What? That's insane. Here's the Jackson Doctrine, folks. E.W. Jackson for America. We will compete with China on every level, everywhere. That means economically, culturally, politically, and yes, militarily. So in addition to kicking them, the Monroe Doctrine would have just kicked them out of our hemisphere. Kick them out of our hemisphere, as far as I'm concerned, kick them out of everywhere else too. Kick them out of everywhere we can. In other words, let them know we're here. And we are a force to be reckoned with. And we will never be overcome. We will never be overwhelmed, and we will never be dominated by a godless communist regime. As I end, I'll come back to this tomorrow. Here again, here's the fundamental difference. We base our country on the truth that all men are created equal and endowed by our Creator, and that the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are given to us by Him. And Communist Chinese Party says there is no God, there is no Creator. You can't reconcile those two views of the world. You can't recognize those two views of life, and you can't reconcile those two views of life, and you can't reconcile those two views of God. One says there is no God, which the Bible calls a fool, and the other country says there is a God and our rights and freedoms come from Him. Notice all of this keeps coming back to this fundamental question, folks, this fundamental issue. We've got to come back to God. We've got to make God the center of our culture and the central figure in American life. We do that, then we can rebuild our families. And that's really the next issue. But look, that's going to do it for today. I've got to go. And I think I've shared long enough. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your support in every way. Don't forget, July 14th, 7:14, 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. So come out and join us for a 2 Chronicles 7:14 patriotic rally to secure America's future. It's going to be a great time. 6 p.m. for the reception, 7 p.m. for the event. Come on out to the downtown Richmond Marriott, 500 East Broad in Richmond, Virginia. Come from wherever you are. You won't regret it. It's going to be an historic event. God bless each and every one of you. You stand up, step up, speak up, refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit, because we are on God's side.